So, hi guys, welcome back everyone. So hopefully very shortly we're going to have, I can see Chris is just coming up now. So we're going to be joined very shortly by our two moderators from the panel today, by Chris and also by Joanne. There's Chris now. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Dan.
Oh, you think you're on mute, Chris? We can't hear you. We still can't hear you there, Chris.
Oh dear.
I don't know if you wanted to check. There's a little cog which you could try. Oh, Lula says she can hear Chris, so maybe it's something to do with my sound there. Sorry. Go again, Chris.
Hello. All good.
Sorry, it was me. The problem was with me, so I was panicking you. Everyone's saying they can hear you, so apologies. Chris, we can hear you loud and clear. Sorry about that. I can hear you fine now. So we're just waiting. Hopefully, Joanne is going to be coming over shortly to join. I can see Joanne's just coming to join as well. Any thoughts, Chris? I mean, you obviously moderated the panel this morning. And any thoughts on the panel we've just heard on 6 gigahertz? And Joanne's here as well. But any specific thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really nice sort of contrast between the first session and the second session. And I think it's an example of once you go down to the details, you suddenly start seeing the challenges and the issues, and it becomes thorny and tricky, and there's real world problems that are really hard to solve. But I think as well, it's a good example of there are a lot of examples there of technology and the potential it can have in there to help address effectively a band where you're sharing with multiple applications and different services, all interspersed and intermixed. And so I think more technology and thinking about how that technology can use and then be applied to other areas as well when it's successful.
Thanks, Chris. I can see Joanne's here now, Chris is here, and Thomas has joined as well as the first of our discussants to come up. So, guys, I'll leave it to you. Over to you both, and to Thomas as well. And yeah, looking forward to the discussion. So over to you guys.
Cheers. Thanks, Dan. Joanne, I don't know whether it's worth us both just quickly summarising the key points we both took away from our sessions today. If I sort of take the liberty of jumping in and starting on there, and hopefully this will provide a little bit of food for thought for other people coming in to have their comments and views. I was trying to think about sort of themes coming out of the session on future of spectrum management, and one thing was regulatory certainty. We heard this coming out quite a lot. People want to know what's happening, how it's going to happen, and they want to know that that's going to happen for a long time. Mm-hmm. This theme of one size does not fit all continually was coming up, and that there needs to be an appreciation of the differences and not trying to shoehorn everything into the same solution. It might look like a nail, but just because you've got a hammer, don't try and treat it like a nail. And again, driving all this is that exclusive use should be the exception in the future. And the reality is that's where we're going. And so if your exclusive use is becoming less and less, there's going to be more sharing. I think those technology tools are going to be more and more necessary. And I just wanted to contrast that. I mean, for me, the one interesting poll was that we had this just over 2/3 of respondents, and it's not a particularly scientific process, but people who responded to the poll said they want to see more action from regulators in introducing new technology for spectrum management. And I thought that's really, really interesting. And it's also really hard. I think it's a huge challenge for regulators. And we sometimes ask a lot from them, possibly even too much. And I think the commercial sector has to be there to help out and support and provide the expertise, the ability to do things quickly, the innovation, and quite often actually the funding as well, with budgets being squeezed across governments. And I just thought there's two areas for me that I think where technology can help, rather than sort of saying this is the technology to use. I think it's in automation, which one of the panelists brought up. I think in improving automation in spectrum management, I think is really important for unlocking a lot of problems. And then the other thing was technology to help deliver certainty and flexibility. And I think if regulators can think about using technology to try and deliver those two goals, I think that would stand them in good stead.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think. I think the points about technology and all the AFCs and SAS and all that, I think was got some debate. I think, from the perspective of the MNOs, obviously, I think they want exclusivity. They want, exclusive licenses and all that. That's the number one approach. But, the FCC went ahead with CBRS a number of years ago, and it took a while to get this to the fact that now we have SaaS operators, a number of them in service. It is working. I wouldn't say, certainly I think there's a lot of question marks still as to how that will work with a wide usage. But, some users are using it with the GAA type of spectrum that Don Stockdale referred to. There's an auction coming up. We'll see all the large mobile carriers have registered for that auction as participants. We will see how strongly they will value or participate in this auction, and compared to later in this year, starting in December. And it's kind of unfortunate that we have this, or fortunate, depending on how you look at it, that we have this timing. But at the end of the year, there will be the start of the C-band auction for the upper part, above 3.7. So it will be interesting to see if mobile carriers have decided already that CBRS is really good spectrum. They want it, even though it's shared, even though it's a priority, even though you're not guaranteed to use it. If you're not using it, it goes to general authorization users. It will be interesting to see. I think that will kind of set the stage for how do different users share spectrum in the future, and I think that's an interesting experiment. We should know it. It's going to take 6 months and 9 months, but we'll see at that time what kind of value and usefulness I think some of the MNOs have seen in CBRS versus the C-band, for example, which will be exclusive licensing. So I think the next year or so, I think in my view, will be really, really important for the future of sharing spectrum dynamically allocated. It's a little bit what I see. And it is complicated, but it's not necessarily overly complicated, right? It can be done. It is being done. So, and people, technology, telecom companies are good with complicated things. So why not move forward with complicated things?
Guys, I just wanted to say, I think we've got a couple of people with us here now, so maybe we could start listening. We've got lots of people in the queue who want to come up and I think have their thoughts as well. So maybe we can pass to Thomas and Javier and then get a bit of discussion going, and we can bring more up in a second. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
So, Thomas, do you want to kick off? Or?
Oh, okay, that's it's up to me. Thank you very much, and hello to everybody. Maybe I will shortly introduce myself. I'm Thomas Konczak, working in the field of spectrum policy for Deutsche Telekom. And in particular, I would like to, firstly, I would like to thank for the entire afternoon. It was a very interesting discussion and very interesting sessions, both on the sharing and on the 6 gigahertz. My comments will be more focused on the 6 gigahertz discussion. We have heard pros and cons for making the entire band, the upper part, the lower part, unlicensed or licensed. We heard a lot of arguments for both of these aspects. What I would like to remark here is, firstly, we are not talking about the green field. So we have to also to take care what are the applications, what are the services which are running in this spectrum. And one application I have in mind is the fixed links, which are heavily used also by the mobile operators for backhauling their current base stations. We all know that this backhauling capacity will not be sufficient in the future, and there's a need that this backhaul links might be migrated to fixed band with a higher capacity and a broader bandwidth. However, currently we have these applications here, and there's a strong request and need from the operators to protect this. And I'm very curious how this can be protected with an unlicensed usage, which is not under control of a regulator. Secondly, we have heard a lot of interesting discussions about possible use cases which we might see in the future. And I would agree with Reza. It's not just for consumers. There will be a lot of industry use cases and vertical use cases which need a lot of capacity and which need predictability of the quality they get from an operator or from a service provider, and they will also rely on a certain level of quality of service, which cannot be guaranteed if you are not aware and if you are not sure what resources you can get in these unlicensed bands. And therefore, we have already in the decision in Europe, and I think it was a very good approach of CPT to make a stepwise approach, so to say, to think about the lower part for an unlicensed usage. And this decision is more or less done. Also, the ECC has the final say next week. However, we have this agenda item for WRC 23 to think about IMT in the upper part. And we should not make the mistake to take early decisions now, whether to make it unlicensed or licensed. Also, I have a clear preference for licensed usage. We need the spectrum because it's a good balance between coverage and capacity, also in the 6 gigahertz. And Reza has already said that intelligent antenna technology will overcome the coverage, the propagation issues with the 6 gigahertz. But this is what we need in the future also to satisfy this, again, the demand we will see there. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Thomas. Javier, be great to hear your thoughts either on that or if you want to make some other points.
Okay, thank you. So first, to introduce myself, my name is Javier Berlison. I work for ISOA, the Spanish satellite operator. I'm here representing ISOA, the Satellite Operator Association of Europe and Middle East and Africa. So I enjoy a lot the conversation. It's been very interesting and I learned a lot. I see the problem that, it's, some people mentioned that in the first panel, we have more services and the same spectrum. So sharing is becoming a reality and we'll see more and more debate in the coming years. That's for sure. So in this sense, satellite has a long experience in sharing. We have, just to mention some examples, we see satellite sharing paths of KU and Ka-band with the fixed service. We see, for example, satellite sharing some ranges in the 26 gigahertz band for gateway stations with IMT, actually. We are seeing right now that is something that is currently a debate within CPT and ECC, how to use the Q and V bands, which includes the 40 gigahertz range for satellite. And we also have the case of Erlang that was mentioned in the second panel of today. So we have many examples of satellite being involved in spectrum. And I'm sure we'll have more in the future, as I said. So sharing, in my view, is not always possible. It should be addressed on a case-by-case basis. I think that Mohammed mentioned that in the first panel. One size does not fit all. In my view, that depends a lot on the type of deployment. When there is an ubiquitous deployment, that you have stations that can be located everywhere, sharing is an issue because you cannot guarantee the needed separation distance to protect the other service. So getting into the 6 gigahertz panel, again, that I think that was very interesting, and that's a subject that from the perspective of satellite is quite interesting because there are two different systems that that want to deploy service and are deploying services in the band. So in Europe, Wi-Fi and Erlang is something that is already happening, and we have the ECC report 302 that is addressing how to do that. For sharing with satellite in this band, it was possible to develop some measures that will allow the coexistence and future use of satellite while letting Erlang and Wi-Fi operate. It includes, I think it was mentioned by the previous panelists, but it includes limiting power, operating indoor, and license use of the band. So I do have a thought and a question that I tried to raise during the panel, but because of time it was not possible. I see that mobile, and we'll have the example of agenda item 1 and 2, is also asking to use a spectrum in this 6 gigahertz range. So my question to the mobile industry, if I may, would be to understand how they, Erlang has proven to share with satellite, how the mobile industry or how IMT will take care and will protect and allow for future use of. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Javier.
Does anybody want?
So if anyone wants to come up and answer that question, please join the queue. Otherwise, Ian, what do you? Great to hear your views and thoughts.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, evening, depending on where you were. Firstly, thank you for the presenters that have preceded me on two very interesting topics, and I'm actually going to cut across both of those because I think they are interrelated. It's interesting. I've been involved in the CPT work that's ongoing still, as Chris explained, on the lower part of the 6 gig band in both Working Group SC and Working Group FM on the studies into sharing with Wi-Fi and incumbent services. And those reports have proved that Wi-Fi, and certainly for low power indoor and very low power outdoor, can successfully share with the fixed links that one of the previous speakers from, I think it was Deutsche Telekom, mentioned, and obviously the satellite service, which has also just been mentioned. Interestingly, also during that work, there was a submission there was a lot of work done by Ericsson in conjunction with the Swedish regulator that said for IMT, we need to clear the band. So I think above 6425, the IMT community is looking to clear the band because, as we've heard, sharing with from IMT with the incumbents is very difficult. And so taking the gentleman from Deutsche Telekom's point, he might get the IMT in the 6 gig band, but he'd lose his backhaul. And is this the best frequency for IMT? Well, there's talks in some countries, UK for 1 above 3.8 all the way up to 4.2. That's adjacent to an existing IMT band that would look to be quite a good fit for expansion of IMT services. Certainly we're looking at that. We are the company I work for, Ruckus is an IMT, well, CBRS primarily at the moment, but we do have IMT interests as well as Wi-Fi interests. And so that would look to be an obvious solution there for their mid-band. But coming back to Wi-Fi and 6 gigs, there is a lot of congestion in Wi-Fi in the big cities now. 2.4 is very congested. 5 gigs has all the problems associated with DFS and avoidance of radars. And yes, the UK and possibly the Czech Republic later this year will open up the 5.8 band. But even there is concerns about radars and ITS road tolling systems and such like. So 6 gig spectrum does give us the ability to exploit this contiguous spectrum for new services, for low latency, the video service, the augmented reality, the virtual reality. And that's the big brave new world for Wi-Fi, and there's a lot of interest in that. And I do think the US has stolen a march on Europe because we were first to start, but the US has been first to the finish post, allowing the spectrum. So hopefully Europe can catch up later this year. Unfortunately, we're only catching up with 500 megs and not the full 1.2, but hopefully if we can prove that the sharing with the incumbents, because it's the same incumbents above 6425, then we can move quickly on the second half, and hopefully maybe even we can share with the IMT guys as well, because this is not about technology. This is not a 3GPP versus IEEE technology debate. This is more about sharing with the incumbents and being able to deliver services and let them still have access to their spectrum, which there's big question marks over whether the IMT community can do, certainly for standard power outdoors. Thank you.
So can we get any comments on sharing between satellite and IMT and the 6 gigahertz band? I don't know if anyone has any comments saying that it's not all doom and gloom, that it could be done in the future. Jennifer, I don't know. Reza, Jennifer.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that is possible, whether you're looking at outdoor standard power or even higher power IMT licensed operations, that the sharing schemes are not that different, and that an AFC could be used to enable unlicensed access as well as licensed access on a shared basis. It really, it kind of doesn't matter. It's more an issue of knowing the location of the incumbents, the sensitivity, and being able to identify and manage the new users and their operational characteristics, whatever power level they're using, and their location. And to some of the comments earlier about low power indoor being a difficulty because of challenges with locating them, I'd like to point out that smartphone apps are used all the time to help set up access points and range extenders, and they're fairly accurate in terms, even indoors, and could be relied upon to provide location even for indoor low power devices, if that would help with those countries that are struggling to figure out the how to manage interference to incumbents, but yet enable access to these frequencies as soon as possible. And to that point, I don't think it's going to take as long as Mark Gibson has suggested to get AFCs certified and standard powered devices out into the market in the 6 gigahertz band. Our AFC is ready to go. Given the lack of requirement for interoperability in the United States between AFCs, we don't think a lot of standards work is needed. And we're going to be showing a demo of our AFC during one of tomorrow's sessions. But, we think this could be done by the end of the year or very early 2021. So, we want to make that tool available for folks to make sure that they've got the flexibility to provide, the types of services and applications that standard power outdoor devices, can achieve, as well as meet the interference management challenges that some of the countries in Europe have identified. So,
I think Reza, you wanted to chime in on this, or anybody else?
To be honest, I could have, but I've spoken before in the panel session. So if others wish to, I'll give my space to others.
Yes.
Fair.
Yes. Okay.
You're next in queue, Ira. Yeah.
Sure. So I'll jump in here. Thank you. Two very, very interesting sessions this morning. So I guess a few observations and comments. We've talked a lot or heard a lot about, sharing versus exclusive use, licensed versus unlicensed. And, and we keep pitting these against each other. I think that might be a bit of a false choice. I think what we've seen over the last number of years as spectrum policy has evolved is we kind of need both. And the trick is kind of figuring out what the right mix within any of the various frequency bands. In a sense, it's almost like the song lyrics go, you can't have one without the other. We rely so much on Wi-Fi today, on unlicensed, to complement the licensed access. I mean, think about today. I mean, most of us are on laptops, probably Wi-Fi connected to this conference. It hasn't, I know on my end, it hasn't necessarily been without a glitch here and there. And, think about if there's more spectrum available, Wi-Fi 6 with the difference in the protocols, would that be better? So, which kind of brings you to the compelling case towards 6 gigahertz of making that spectrum available for unlicensed usage, which we've done in the US. And we've been pretty aggressive on all spectrum fronts here in the US, as Chairman Pai said last week. We've been acting very aggressively. But I also like to think about it almost in the way of driving in New York City, where you want to be a defensive driver, but in New York, if you're not aggressive, you're not going to get anywhere. So I kind of think of it that we're the same way. We've been very aggressive in opening spectrum bands for all different uses and different types of access. But we've also been, kind of cautious or defensive in a way in ensuring that incumbent users are protected. And we've been very careful with the rules we've put into place. So the case at 6 gigahertz, I think, is very compelling, given that there is a lot of spectrum. If you do look at licensed versus unlicensed, we're making a lot of spectrum available for licensed also, as I had mentioned, 280 megahertz at the C-band up at 3.7. We've got the CBRS auction coming up next month. We're looking at spectrum below 3450 with our federal colleagues to see if we can free some spectrum up there. We've made the millimeter wave spectrum available. So, and then if you look at 6 with all of the incumbencies, and to clear that would be a massive undertaking. On top of that, being right next to the existing 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi band, so readily available equipment that can easily be implemented, and under the rules that the commission adopted, which I think are fairly conservative for low power indoor use. It's lower power than we provide in other Wi-Fi bands. We've put a lot of we've put a lot of requirements, not to make it onerous, but to ensure the protection of the existing links for the indoor usage. And and in my mind, it makes a lot of sense. Get the spectrum out there. We've provide for these much wider channels, higher bandwidths, higher data rates, and let's see how it evolves. I mean, we could not have guessed the applications that have evolved in the past with the spectrum we've put out there, and I can't even imagine to guess what we might see going forward. And we've provided for 160 megahertz channels. We've been forward-looking to allow for 320 megahertz channels for the next iteration of Wi-Fi that'll be coming down the road, and trying to get all these things in place so that the consumer can take advantage. And for folks who kind of feel that maybe Wi-Fi and unlicensed doesn't provide the quality of service they might need, as I think Thomas was saying a couple comments earlier, that's a choice the consumer can make based on their application and their needs. If they feel that they need to subscribe for certain access, they can do that. Or if they want to use the unlicensed route, they can do that. But it's all application need and user specific dependent. And we feel, let's provide those options. Let the smart folks out there and the users out there figure out the best way to use the spectrum. And we think it's going to work really, really well. And just the last comment on the AFC, we've got a lot of experience in the past, starting from white space, moving on to what we've done in CBRS with the SAS. And the AFC we've implemented here, in a sense, is the most simplest of all of those. So given the progress we've seen with those systems, we think this is going to take off and provide not only the indoor access, which we think is going to come first, but also plenty of outdoor access to supplement a number of these providers to provide a little bit more wide area Wi-Fi coverage where it's needed. So, I think, again, just to sum it all up, there's a compelling case to move forward on all of these fronts. And I think, if I could just say something to my European colleagues, it would be great if you join us in looking at freeing up the full 1200 megahertz for unlicensed and provide some harmonization globally moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Ira. I must admit, I find that there's a very interesting question here between the balance of protecting and the risk to incumbents versus the opportunity of innovation and new uses. And as ever, it would be great to hear some regulators if they have some views on how they're going to make that decision, because ultimately make those decisions, and they're really tricky. Pavi, can I ask you to if you have any comments or thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I think it has been very good discussions and interesting presentations as well, and want to thank you all on those. I'm Päivi Ruuska from Telia Company, and plan to say something on 6 gigahertz topic, although I agree very much with the previous speakers, or some of the previous speakers, that this is very much connected to the spectrum sharing topic as well. Just to introduce a bit what Telia Company is, to understand a bit maybe our position as well. So we operate in Nordic and Baltic countries, which are very sparsely populated countries, but people are using very much mobile data. For example, in Finland, the average data use per subscription is or has been over 30 gigabytes per month already before the 5G time. So I think this 150 gigabytes kind of what Huawei was presenting is kind of very much reachable, not quite soon possible. And many of our countries are also neighboring Russia, which causes the situation that the C-band is not available without restrictions everywhere. So we really see the demand for more mid-band spectrum in future for mobile. And not surprisingly, my view is very much in line with Thomas from Deutsche Telekom. So we think that 6 gigahertz, so upper part of 6 gigahertz should remain for licensed use. And one reason is fixed links. The lower part is already being assigned for Wi-Fi in Europe, and that has impacted already on possibilities to deploy links in this band. And in some countries, we are also already kind of moving them away. The other reason is what I mentioned already, is that we need more mid-band spectrum for 5G in future. And it was very, very good that also the first presentation today from Facebook recognized that also this VR, AR will need also 5G, not only Wi-Fi. So it is necessary for many use cases to ensure sufficient spectrum for 5G as well. And as a summary, what has been brought up, that the mid-band spectrum is growing, especially in urban areas, and millimeter wave. There has been kind of somebody mentioned that there has been a lot of spectrum made available in WRC-19, and that is true. There is a lot of spectrum in millimeter wave bands, but that is for very different use case, and that's not fulfilling the same demand because of the low propagation in urban areas. And even if we have like a lot of spectrum in other bands as well, in mobile bands, which are now being used for 2G, 3G, 4G, and operators start refarming those also for 5G. But those bands don't provide large enough blocks of spectrum for the new demand. And I think regarding this sharing approach, I think this is very much, if this upper part of 6 gigahertz will be kind of kept for licensed use, it would be possible nationally to consider what is the existing use and what are the new demands. For example, if there is a lot of links in the band and not very high demand for mobile, then it is possible that country does or waits for assigning the band for 5G. And if there is not so many links, then it's possible to refarm the spectrum for mobile. And I think in quite many countries, the situation is such that the 6 gigahertz links are mainly in rural areas, and mobile demand would be more in the urban areas. So then it would be possible to kind of assign local licenses for urban areas for 5G. And also regarding the sharing, we also see that if licensed or the licensed approach is much easier to kind of control, and the protection of existing use is easier because you can set conditions in the licenses or issue only local licenses, for example. And you also know who the users are. So if there is interference situations, then you know who to contact to. Yeah, I think that was what I wanted to bring up on this. Thank you.
So Erica, do you want to chime in? You've been waiting quite some time, so please go ahead.
You have a lot of people who want to say something. So first of all, thanks for today. I think there were 2 really great panels. My name is Erica Teder, and I'm part of Ericsson, so I will not comment on the sharing panel. We had a very good representation with Josta. But regarding the 6 gigahertz, I think there were several very good points that were brought up. One was about spectrum needs, and we also see from Ericsson that there will be need for more spectrum for 5G for operators. There has also been some comments about that there should be a good mix between licensed and unlicensed, and I think this brings up to the discussion of how Europe should consider now the 6 gigahertz. If they have already decided on the unlicensed part for the unlicensed usage for the lower part, maybe a good mix would be to consider licensing the upper part. And in terms of sharing with other services, if we look about fixed service, of course, if you have a license, easier to coordinate with fixed links. And if we think about especially satellites, in WRC 15, there were some sharing studies done, and the conclusions were indeed that it would be possible to have indoors. But since 2015, mobile has really developed a lot. And in particular, if you look at the changes from 4G to 5G, it's not really a small evolution. It's a really big changes. We see some techniques that were not there before, and that will really impact the sharing studies. So it's a really good chance for the possibilities of sharing with satellites.
So thank you. So if I summarize, you're all in favor of having licensed in the top 700 of the 6 gigahertz, right?
Yes, in Europe, yes.
Okay, in Europe, yes, of course. Simon Pike, you want to chime in?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So for those who don't know me, I was with a mobile operator for 16 years, but I'm now independent and can therefore speak my personal view without having to take account of a company position or a sectoral position. And I have to say that the arguments about both Wi-Fi capacity and mobile capacity are incremental. And my suspicion is that the increment will turn out to be less than is currently being claimed. For me, the thing that is transformational is uncoded video. So for connecting, for example, from a device to a VR headset, and the bit rate is much higher, the power is very low, and there's a demand for the power consumption of the device to be low as well. And that moves you towards an unlicensed regime, which may or may not be Wi-Fi. But I think that is where that demand for the uncoded video, you're talking about hundreds of megabits per second fundamentally there, is where the added value could be greatest. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. I think we're probably down to our last minute or two. If there's any last people who want to have a very quick 1 minute final word, please make yourself known. Otherwise, I suppose it's us to, if we want to make a couple of closing remarks or
Ian, maybe Ian Martin wants to say something.
Yeah, I just want to pick up another thing that on subject to sharing, and it was brought up. I can't remember who mentioned it, but I think it was on the first session this morning about old technologies and their sort of like end of life situation. We all see technology churn increasing rapidly, and the lifespan of technologies is getting shorter and shorter. And this creates a problem when you come to sharing, because what was acceptable in performance 10 years ago is no longer acceptable performance today, and that really does hinder the refarming of spectrum. And this is at the heart of the CBTC issue that we're facing at the lower part of the 6 gig band system. It was a proprietary system. It was not a standardized system. And yet, as Scott said, 90 meg guard band over 30 meg allocation. And that's 90 meg above. One assumes that they want 90 megs below as well. But even if it's just 90 megs above, that's 3 times the allocation they're asking for as a guard band. That's not efficient spectrum sharing at all. It's not efficient spectrum usage. So technology, even with incumbents, does need to evolve. And maybe it's time for the CBTC community to look at a modern system that delivers their needs and retrofit the trains. I mean, it'll be a case of ripping out the radio units. I'm not saying replace the entire train, that'd be crazy. But you could swap out the radio units. I mean, trains, boats and planes, they're upgraded all the time throughout their life. The actual shell has a very long life, but the bits inside are changed several times during the lifetime. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. It's a very nice individual example of technology there. Dan, I sense you're here to...
I am. Well, no, it's been a really interesting session. I mean, first of all, we do have about a minute left. So, I mean, either of you, did you have any final conclusions, final thoughts, Joanne or Chris?
well, I think my final thoughts is that sharing and the balance between licensed and unlicensed is indeed very complex, and different opinions there. I do think that within the next year or so, we will see if there's an evolution of perspective of MNOs, for example, on sharing, which I don't think has ever been really in favor up to now. And there's a lot of studies to show why that's the case, but we'll see how things evolve. And nevertheless, in Europe, you will get likely 500 megahertz more for Wi-Fi, which is better than nothing, that's for sure. But it's a long cry, very short from 1200. So we're not going to see necessarily, certainly not in the short term, any alignment between a pole in the US and the Americas and a pole in the UK in this band, at least in the short term.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Thank you, Joanna. And Chris, any final thoughts from yourself?
I think on a similar theme to Joanne, when you talk about the specific issues, such as 6 gigahertz, there's a lot of very good points being made, and it's tough, tricky decisions. I think when we try and step back and want to try and think about, as we were talking about in the first session, slightly broader and from a slightly higher, more strategic level, what is the things that the technology we should be doing to try and improve spectrum management generally and in the whole, trying to be able to step up issues to consider things out of the heat of those debates, I think is really important. And I think the more space we can get to do that, and everyone trying to, or at least spending a part of our time of trying to think a bit more into the future rather than just waiting for the issues to come along and bumping into them and then trying to sort them out.
Brilliant, Chris. Look, thank you. And guys, thank you. We've had, both panels today were really interesting. And I think there was definitely not agreement from all the panelists, but that's what makes it an interesting panel. And I think thank you to both of you. Thank you to all of our panelists. And thank you to everyone who's taken part in this session as well. We managed to get quite a few different opinions in that they have your say as well. So I think there's definitely, a lot of, as I said, different views. And I think it's great to hear some of those today. So thank you both very much. And thank you all for your participation today. So hope you've all enjoyed today. Tomorrow we start a little bit earlier. So do check the calendars for what time we have. I think 3 sessions today, I think, plus 3 sessions tomorrow, plus the showcase sessions as well. We're going to be moving on to talk about WRC. And we've actually got a few polls, which we've already put up now. So if you wanted to have a look and even vote now on the polls for tomorrow's session on WRC and some of the key priorities for WRC 23, then please do have a look at that. So looking forward to seeing everyone back here tomorrow. In the meantime, the platform is going to be open for the next 30 minutes or so. So please do feel free to go and have a look at the exhibition stands again, to use the networking area as well. And as I said, that will be open for the next 30 minutes or so. So guys, thank you all so much. Chris, Joanne, thank you again to both of you, and wishing everyone a pleasant evening and looking forward to seeing everyone back here again tomorrow. Thank you all very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.